Everyone, I will start by sharing my screen. Do you see my screen? Please let me know.
Yes, we see.
All right, thank you. So, hi everyone, I'm Ala. I'm a software developer at HedgeGuard and the co-organizer at GDG Coast Lebanon. I've been working with Angular for 3 years and I have given a couple of workshops previously. In this workshop, we're going to explore Angular's forms, pipes, and directives. So this workshop assumes that you have some knowledge in Angular, but if you don't, it's okay. You'll still be able to follow along. And it's okay, you can brush up on the knowledge later. There are 2 workshops that you can actually go to. There is one called A Gentle Introduction to Angular that was done with GDG Manama. It covers theoretical basics and all of that. Just to get you started. And to build a better foundation, there's another workshop called Applied Angular that helps you get started creating your first Angular application. So what is Angular? Just briefly, Angular is an application design framework and development platform for creating efficient and sophisticated single-page applications. And today we're going to cover the 3 features that are forms, pipes, and directives of this framework, and we are going to implement a couple of examples. So what are we going to be building? Actually, what are we going to be extending? Basically, we are going to have a very simple trivia app by the end. And you can actually access all of this code through GitHub. If you want to get started, you can clone the following repository. Navigate to the directory simple trivia devfest 2020 npm install git checkout exercise. The exercise branch contains the incomplete application that we will build upon. The master branch contains the completed application in case you ever want to reference it, and you can ng serve. So let's first go over the application. Right now, this is on branch exercise. We have the questions of the trivia, we have the players that are playing, and supposedly we want to be able to create questions and we want to be able to create new players. So I will go over what the application contains so far. In our source folder, we have the components. The components have a game, which is our main component that contains the one that we see over here. We have the player create, which allows us to create players, and we have the questions create, which allows us to create the questions. We also have the models of the player, which includes the first name and the last name, and the trivia question. Identifiable just means that these models have an ID. We also have services for the player and the question. These allow you to create, update, and delete as much as you need to. And you have the shell, which contains the header. We also have Angular routing that allows us to go from one component to the other. So how can we use Angular forms and what do we use them for? Basically, Angular forms, or just forms in general, help us to gather user input based on specific business logic. Sometimes you have to collect information in a sequential way. Sometimes you need to hide and show certain inputs. And Angular helps us actually do that in a seamless way. There are 2 ways that you can implement forms in Angular. The first way is using the Angular 1 way, which is the ngModel, and the second way is the ReactiveForms Module. So for the first way, which is template-driven forms, we will be using the ngModel, and we will be doing that inside of the players create. So what we're going to do is we go into app, components, player create, and we are going to go into our player component.ts. We know that we are going to have to fill a player model, with the information that we want. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to create a new player that is just going to be empty because we don't yet know the information. So we'll start with the first name, empty, last name also empty for now. And we know that we are going to have to at some point submit our form. So I will create a submit. And when on submit, we are going to need to create our player. So because we already have an existing service, I am just going to inject it using Angular's dependency injection. So it is going to be players service, and then again, players service. And this is a functionality that I would like to include, which is also on submit. I would like to route back to my game component, which is my main component. So I will also import the router to be able to do that. Okay. So first things first, on submit, what I want to happen is I want to create a new player. So I just simply go create player. And I want to navigate back to the home, which is my main page. So I will just go to the empty one. So right now, what we did is we created a player model that will include the information that we will want to save. We used the service to actually create the player, and we navigate back on submit. So how can we actually do that in our HTML? How do we allow the users to see this? So to start, I'm just going to add a header to indicate the page that we are on, and just tell the user that they will be creating a player. We can have a div just for organization, and we will start by creating the form. So the form is going to have to include our inputs. The first one, in this application, we're actually using Angular material. It is just a way for us to make the application a little bit easier to design, so that you don't have to think about everything. Everything is already there for you. So I'm going to use matform field, and it's going to get upset because we need to import it. The way that you can do that is you could go to shared material module, go in here, and input module. We can do that over here as well. Not misspell it every time. Over here. Okay, so I will save this, and I will go back here. Nothing much is going to change inside of the component. We are just going to have the title, and there's an empty div down here. So what's going to happen is we're going to add the mat label for the first name. And we are then going to add the input. Okay, so the input is going to be of type text. And we are going to give it a name, which is first name. Because we are using the ngModel way, we have to name it so that Angular can be able to identify it within our form. So how do we use this magic of Angular forms in the template-driven way? First of all, we have to make sure that inside of our app module, we have the forms module so that we can actually take advantage of all of the directives that are associated with the Angular forms. So what we're going to do is we're going to define our form. What this does is it creates a variable for us that makes it accessible to us inside of the interpolation. Otherwise, we would not be able to access the information as easily. And what we're going to say is we want this particular form to be an ng form. In the background, Angular will create its own its own model, similar to how we created this, that will give us access to several properties that the form has. So now we have created the form. We need to bind the properties of the model that we created to the form, to the input that we have. So what we use in this situation is the ngModel. The ngModel, basically what it does is it helps us bind in a two-way binding whatever property that we put in here. So the property that we are going to use is the player's first name. What this is saying is that if any changes happen within this particular input, I want this change to be reflected back here in my model. And similarly, if I make any changes here, I want them to be reflected inside of my form over here. So let's create the second form field. So this is going to be the last name. Similarly over here, the last name. Same over here. So this way we've created our inputs. To add the Angular material, what you can do is just add a mat input to both inputs to make sure that the CSS is applied properly. So let's check what we've got so far. So right now we have our two fields. We can add the names. Now, what we can do, we need to be able to submit this form and submit the information that is inside of this form to be able to create our new player. What we can do is we can use the ngSubmit. This is specific to forms that allows us to actually submit the information in the forms. And what we do is we specify the function that we created. So we use the submit on ngSubmit. To be able to trigger this, what we have to do is create a button of type submit, Okay, and this will automatically be able to, the form will automatically be able to detect that this is a submit button within the form, and when I click it, I want to actually submit my form. So I want to trigger the submit function. So let's actually put that. To make it more, to make it prettier, we can use the mat button directive. And once we save now, we go back here and we see what we have. So we have our submit right now. I will say, okay, H2. And if I submit this, you will see that the player is added. The reason that the first player is not there is because the initialization assumes that if I have no players, I want to add a new one. But since I already have a new one here, it didn't create the old one. So we have a small problem here is that if I come in here and I press submit, I create an empty player. And I never want that. So what I have to do is I need to validate that certain conditions are met within my form. And the way that I can do that in the ngModel way is I can simply use the regular validation of input. What I can do is I could just add required over here, and then Angular will automatically detect that these are required fields. Although it will still allow us to submit because we don't have a mechanism that blocks us from doing so. But the difference is now, if I keep it empty, Angular will show me that something is wrong with the validation here. To ensure that I cannot submit an empty player, what I can do is, because we defined an ng form up here, I can actually disable the submit form based on the validity of my the form that I created up here. So I will do is disabled, and I will say if the form not valid, I need to make sure that it is only disabled if the form is not valid. So I will save it. I will go in here. If I come here now and I write, and this one remains empty, my submit is still disabled. But if I fill them both and I submit, I now have my second player. And this is basically how you can use the ngModel way. So what are the disadvantages and advantages of this particular way? So the disadvantages, if you have a form that is like really large, it has a lot of validation, it's, for example, has multiple nested groups of the form, it can become a little bit tricky to keep track of all of these validations. And the other disadvantage is you cannot test it using unit tests in with frameworks such as Karma. But the advantage of it is if you have very simple forms, it's very easy and very quick to do it. It's also extremely easy to learn this way of creating the forms. So the second way that we are going to do is the ReactiveForms module. And this one, although is a little bit more intensive, it keeps everything in one place. So we're going to go into our questions, and we are going to create something that is very similar to this. So let's start with that. But before we do, I am going to check inside of my app module if I have the ReactiveForms module, which I don't. So in this situation, I would have to import the ReactiveForms module. Also, Visual Studio automatically puts in my imports. If you don't have that, you might need to write these yourself. But this basically is imported from the Angular Forms package. So let's go into questions. So let's start out the same way that we started out with the player. What we're going to do, first of all, is we need to understand that we have a model that we want to fill. In this situation, it's going to be a little bit different because we are going to directly be defining the form. So we're going to say that the form is going to be a form group, but we need to use the form builder for that. So Angular has something called the form builder that allows you to generate the form groups that it automatically implicitly does when you use this. So let's import it. So we're going to do form builder. Okay. We also know that we are going to need to create a new question. So we are going to, at the same time, import our question service. Okay, so question service. And finally, the router. Okay, so let's import that as well. And so the model that we want to fill this time is not going to be just a plain trivia question model. In this situation, we are going to actually use the form builder to create a form group that Angular is going to use. Group. This group is going to contain an object, and this object is going to have a question, empty, and an answer, which is also going to remain empty for now. Okay, and we know that on submit, same as the other one, we are going to need to create the question, but this time we don't have the plain model, and the questions takes a trivia question. If we check the method itself, it has to take a trivia question. So T over here, question service takes a trivia question. So let's go back to questions create. So we need to create, but our form itself is a form group, but the value of it can be a trivia question. All right, so now we've created it. We can route back, navigate same as the player, and now we have everything set up, except over here because my linter is upset. And we make sure that's fixed. So what I can do in this case is I go back to my HTML and I can start working again. So same thing with the play question over here. Okay, we create the div, form, and the form field. All right, the mat label once again, and finally the input, if I can spell input correctly, once again. All right, so the first thing over here is going to be question. And we are going to add the input type once again. But in this situation, we are not going to add the name because when we are using ReactiveForms module, we will define a form control name, and that will automatically give us a name for the field. So the way that we can do this is now we would add a form group, and the form group name is going to be called, we called it form over here. So this is our form group. It's called form. And then we go back, and instead of having the name and the ngModel, all we have to do in this case is just form control name and add the name question in this case. We do the same thing over here. Answer. And we need to do the same thing with the submit. So it looks very much the same, but the difference is how much access you will have to the form model. And I will show you what else you can do with the ReactiveForms module. So this is going to be exactly the same as before. So type also submit for this to work. And make it pretty by just adding these. And let's test out what we have so far. Okay, let's create a question. We have the question and the answer. Okay, so we have the question, we have the answer, and we have the submit. So let's add that. And we have an error. We do not have a validator, so I think the issue is just this. Okay, no more errors. So the difference between having this and having the brackets is this is going to look for the variable in here, while this is, without having them, it's just going to be plain text. That's why it was not able to detect it. Let's add the question and the answer and submit. And now we have a question and the answer. But we have the same issue, is that we don't want to allow the user to add an empty question and an empty answer. In this case, what we can do is we will add the validators directly into our form group, and they will all be in one place, and you can have them all displayed in front of you when you want to check what they are. So we're going to say that this is required. We're going to do the same thing for the answer, and we're going to test it out. But before we do, we need to make sure that this is disabled. We need to add this mechanism over here as well. And if the form, same story, form.valid. Okay. So we'll try this. It is not there. We cannot add it. Angular tells us that this is required. Let's make it a little bit clearer what I'm doing. And then submit. We have the question and the answer. So one great thing about the ReactiveForms module is it can allow you to create arrays, array groups. What this means is that instead of having one form, you can have an array of these forms. So assume I want to have the mechanism to add multiple questions at once. Instead of doing it with multiple forms or not being able to predict this, we could just use a form array. Now, I know that I'm going to need this at some point because I'm going to have an array of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a private method called question form group. And I'm just going to return a form group. And it's going to be the group that we have right here. So let's import it. Okay, so instead of having the form group as it is, what we're going to do is we're going to say that this is going to include questions, and the questions property is going to be a form group, a form array, excuse me, dot array. And this array is going to contain, first of all, the question group. So what we did over here is we defined a form group for our big form, which is going to be this. Okay, inside of this form, we defined questions. And the questions are an array of form groups that are the trivia questions that we have. Also, we are going to need to add questions whenever we want. So we want to add a new one. Right now, when the form starts, we're going to have a single question, but we want to have the mechanism to add multiple. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a getter for the questions to make it easier for me to access them and to push a new question into it. So this is going to return a form array, which is my questions. And I need to import that. Okay, so return this dot form dot get, so that we can actually get the value of the array. And we are going to say questions over here. And I want them as a form array. Okay, so just all right, so that I can be able to push and add to it. I will then create the function that will allow me to add the questions. So I will add question. What this will allow me to do, first of all, it is void. And I will push the questions a new form group. So this dot question form group. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we've done so far. We just created a function that returns a form group of question for us with the validators and everything. We changed the form group to include a single property that is an array of more form groups that are related to the questions. We have a getter for the questions that are within the form, returned to us as a form array. And we have a function that will allow us to add questions whenever we want. Now, let's go back and check what we have in our HTML. Inside of our HTML, it's a little bit strange because our form is looking for a form control name that is question and answer. And if you look at the form group that we don't have that anymore. We only have questions. So let's fix our HTML to have that. The first thing that we're going to do is we need to have a container for our array. So what we're going to do is we are going to do the same thing over here and the same thing that we have with the control names, but this time it's an array. And we are going to say that it is called questions. Inside this, we will have to loop over the controls of the questions because questions is an array of the groups. And each one of these groups is going to be considered a control. So let's do that. Okay, we are going to loop over it. So ng4. This is a directive that allows you to create a loop over a certain array, and it will create a new div for each one. So let question of questions dot controls, and Angular will have to be able to differentiate between each group and the other when they're creating the controls. So we are going to be needing the index. So this is just question one will be, the first question will be 0, second 1, 2, 3, same thing over here. And then we will have to create another one. And we will, we will need to create another form group because if we look back at our TypeScript file, each one of these is a form group, and we need to make sure that we specify this for Angular. So we are going to have another form group over here, and it's going to be I in this situation, just to be able to differentiate. If we come back here, we'll see that each I, which is each form group, is going to have the question and the answer. And what we can do in this case is we could just take this, everything that we have over here, okay, and just put it back over here. So now this structure will allow us to actually view what we made. So if we look at it and we come back, we find that we have an error. Okay, so it seems that we have done something. Sorry, I just need to debug this really quick. Form group, form array name. Let's debug together. This .form.get is not a function. Okay, so what I'm doing is I pressed F12. I am checking what the controls are. What errors are coming back. Okay, so a simple way to fix this is what I can do in this situation is instead of using the get in here, I can go dot value. All right, let's try this out. Still not working. Okay, so I'm going to cheat for myself to make sure to see where I've gone wrong. Not environments. I will go to app. I will go to components, questions, questions.ts, and this .forms.get, this is fine. Okay, let's check the HTML. Group name. Okay. So I will save once again. I will stop this. I will start it over. Let's see what we get. Sorry. Okay, so we're still getting nothing. Must have misspelled something over here. Questions. Okay, let's make sure that I wrote it correctly. This is a form group. This is a form group. Okay, 1 second. Okay. All right, so sorry, I have to debug. All right, so okay. Is this form group or form group name? All right, I think I'm gonna skip over this for a little bit. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to check out the main branch and I'm gonna show you what it will look like. So master, okay. I cannot do it. So I'm going to actually stop the run and I will run a different one. So same thing, ngserve. This will serve where we are. Okay, it's still building. All right, so if we go into questions, what we are supposed to have is the ability to add the first one and the second one, and then we add a question. Because we have the validators, if I have anything that is missing, the form.valid will continue to work. So what we are going to be able to do is same thing, Q, and then A. And if we submit, we are going to have multiple different questions. The reason they don't show is because this is a complete, so we won't be able to see everything. So let's get back to our exercise. So I will stop this and I will run this once again. So basically, the reason that we can use this is although we might run into issues and an issue that for some reason is taking too long to debug, it's probably just something that I misspelled somewhere. And I will make sure to update you on what happens when I figure out where I went wrong. But for now, so let's just go over the advantages and disadvantages of the ReactiveForms modules. So the disadvantages is clearly, as what just happened, it has a steeper learning curve, so you might run into more issues when you're developing with it. But the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. And the first advantage is you will be able to unit test this with things like Karma, and you'll be able to just run these unit tests and make sure that things are going as you expect with the validation and all of that. And the second thing that it does is it provides observable-based APIs. The observable-based APIs basically means it will allow you to subscribe to the changes. So if I come here, and let me show you over here. So if I do this, and I write value changes, I can subscribe to the value changes over here. So what I'm saying is, if I see a change happening, so if someone adds a new question or changes something inside of the question or anything like that, I expect you to allow me to do something with it, to let me know. And once you let me know, I will be able to do something with it. Another thing that the forms module allows you to do is it allows you to very quickly reset your form back to what it was initially. It also allows you to, for example, patch a particular value. And instead of updating the whole thing, you can pick which control you want to update instead of updating them all together. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so that basically covers our forms part. We are now going to cover pipes. So pipes basically are useful to transform input values to a more readable or desirable format. And the way that you use them is simply inside of your HTML files, you use the template expression, which is also called interpolation, that allows you to add an input value. This can be a string, an object, whatever it is. You have a pipe operator, and that pipe operator is then taken to a function, which then transforms the value into what you need it. So there are some built-in values and some built-in pipes, that are available to you in your Angular application. So the first one is the date pipe. It just makes the date more readable. The uppercase and lowercase pipe just take a string and apply the case that you want. Title case capitalizes the first letter in every word. Currency changes the number into the currency locale. So for example, it will add a comma for every dot if the locale is like French. And it will add a comma between the hundreds if the locale is, let's say, the US. And you have the decimal pipe, and the percent pipe just allows you to format numbers to specify the number of values after the decimal point. So we are going to actually do an exercise, and we're going to create our own pipe. And we can simply do that using the Angular CLI by doing ngg, which stands for generate pipe, and you just write the name of your pipe. So what happens is this will generate a file, and it will add the pipe decorator that includes the pipe name, and it will also add the transform function. So what we're going to do first is we are going to go into our game component, and we're going to try using one of the built-in pipes. So we go to the game component, we go to the HTML of it. And let's say when I start out, what I'm going to do is I want to display the date at which this game started. So I will just say started on, and I will say, I will add a date over here, which we don't have yet. So we will create the date equals new date. All right, so we will save it and we will see what it looks like. Okay, so the date over here is not exactly the most visually appealing. We want it to be somewhere a little bit more readable for us. So let's say I want to just display the month and the day and the hour and minute. So what I can do is I can add the pipe operator. This is the name of the pipe that we're using. It's called date. And we will add the arguments over here. So what I said is I want the month, I want the day. So this is, you can easily find the syntax for this inside of the Angular documentation. And I want the hours and the minutes. And if I save this now, and I go back, it's going to be displayed in a completely different way. And it just specifies it the way that we need it. So let's go on to create our own pipe. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do ngg pipe, and I want to put it inside of its own folder, and I want to call it player. So what I'm going to do with this pipe is, because I'm very unhappy with the way that the player is being displayed right now. It's the first name and the last name, and that's not the way that I want to display it. So I want to start out by displaying the last name, and I want it to be in all caps, and I want to then display the first name. So what I'm going to do is once this command is finished, it will create our two files. The first one is the test one, and the second one is going to be the actual pipe that we're going to be working on. So I don't want to have any arguments in this situation. The arguments that are present inside of the pipe are correspond to what we saw in the situation. So we're not going to implement any of that today. So we have the pipe decorator with the name, and we have the transform function. The input for us is going to be a player, and the output is going to just be a string that we want to be displayed. So this just needs to be imported. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that for the value, I want the last name to uppercase, and I want to add the space in between. All right, and then I want to display the first name. So value dot first name. Okay, so I will save that, and then I will go back to my game component, HTML. Instead of having to display each player in this way now, I can just delete everything here and only have player, and just run the player through the player pipe for it to display the way that I want. So if I go back, now the player is being displayed in the way that I want it to be displayed. So the third thing that we are going to talk about today are directives. So what are they? Basically, directives are used to extend the power of HTML by giving Angular the instructions it needs to process them. And there are three different types of directives. The first one is a structural directive, and what they do is they shape or reshape the DOM structure, typically by adding, removing, or manipulating elements. We saw an example of that with the ng4, and the ng4 just basically allows you to create, it just creates new elements based on the array that you pass it. So the second type of directive is the attribute directive, and the attribute directive only changes the appearance or the behavior of a particular element or component or even another directive. Some common directives that exist are ngStyle and ngClass, and other attribute directives that we've already used are matInput and matButton to change the way that the matInput and the button look. So how can you create your own directive, whether it's structural or an attribute directive? It is the same way that you create a pipe, and you just use the Angular CLI and ngg directive. And in this case, we are going to try it for ourselves. So let's do ngg directives. And I want to call my directive secret, because what we are going to use it for is because as of right now, if we look at our app, I misspelled it. Okay. If we have our, if we look at our application right now, we simply just see the answer of the question that we have. And we don't want to do that. We want to keep it a secret and only show it when we want to hover over it. So once this command finishes executing, we have our directive file. So if we go in here, we will see that the directive exists and we have the name of the directive. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to go back into the game and I'm going to see that for each question, I'm displaying the question. And in this situation, I want to put my answer inside of a span. All right. Okay, and I want to apply to this span my directive, which is supposed to be secret, but I misspelled it. So we can go back to our directive. And inside of the directive, you can actually access the element by injecting the element ref. Okay, we need to import that as well. All right, so what we can do is l.nativeElement. Let's start out by just completely hiding it. So what we can do is we are now accessing the element, which in our case is going to be the span. And what we're going to work with is just the style and the color, which means the color of the text. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it transparent. So I'm just going to say, I want it to be red, green, blue, just 0, 0, 0. And I want its alpha, which is transparency, to be also 0. So let's test this out. So now if we come here, we will find that it is hidden. I mean, not completely, but the color has become transparent. So we want to add the functionality to be able to display it and hide it on hover. And we can do that by using the host listeners. So we have host listeners that basically listen to different types of user input, and some of the ones that they have are, for example, mouse enter and mouse leave, which are the ones that we are going to use today. So we have mouse enter. On this one, we want the color to be visible. So we want it to go back to normal. And on this one, on the host listener, when the mouse leaves, we will do mouse leave. Okay. Leave. All right. We want the color to go back to being transparent. So what we're going to do is we are going to create so I'll just add void over here so that this stops complaining. All right. Okay. We're going to create a small function over here that is going to be responsible for changing the color. And then we are going to pass a color to it. Okay, we're going to take this. Okay, color. And I'm going to take this because I'm going to need it both up here and here. So I'm just going to say I'm going to define a transparent variable. Let's define it up here, transparent. Okay, so this is going to be my transparent. And I will set the color over here. change color to transparent. And over here, I want to return it to normal. So this will just return it back to its original color. And then this dot change color, I want it to be transparent as well. Okay, so let's test out what we have so far. Okay. Oh. Oh, okay. Just some minor fixes. Okay. So we come here. Now it's working as expected. And now if we hover, mouse enter. Okay, so let's see why that is not working. I might have misspelled something. Mouse enter, mouse leave. I did not. Okay, sorry, I will have to do this again because we are running out of time. Oh. I don't think it matters, in fact. Oh, this is why. Okay, color. That makes sense. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so now it works as expected. So now what we have is when it first starts out, we set it to transparent. On mouse enter, we are setting it back to the original. And on mouse leave, we are setting it back to transparent. So you're probably wondering what the third type of directive is by now. And fun fact, the third type of directive is just the component. Components are in fact just directives that have a template. So at the end of the day, Angular is actually a framework that includes a lot of different features, some of which we went over today. And you can explore a lot more of that on the Angular documentation. All the code, perfectly functional, not like what happened today, is available on my GitHub, Simple Trivia. It's called Simple Trivia for DevFest 2020. And if anybody has any questions, I'm going to double check. Okay. All right. All right. So if there are no questions, you can stay in contact with me through any of these social media platforms. I'm always available. Don't hesitate to ping me at any time. And if you want to know a little bit more about what we covered, you can find everything over here. And yeah, so that's it for me.
Thank you, Ala. So, seems there is no question. Check if someone has a question. No. Okay, I don't know if someone is already connected here, but we will announce the winners. So, notified on Facebook wherever he shares or answers the. So now we will do a live draw. No comments, no new comments are allowed. I already put the name, and I first we know we want to know what. Oh, sorry for that.